In lecture 5, we talked about different measures of oral diseases, and we ended up talking about indices and how it is the only measure that really gives us an indication of the severity of dental diseases. So in this particular lecture, we're going to be talking about some common dental indices that are used in epidemiological research. And there are a lot of them that we're going to go over. So we're going to have 4 different videos specifically on these indices. And I want to say up front that there's a lot of information on each one of these indices that we're going to go over. And I don't want you to spend a ton of time learning the particulars of a 1 means this, a 2 means this, and you'll understand what that means here in a second. But the general rule of thumb is that if you know the range of scores and you understand that the rule of thumb is that the lower the number on the range of score means healthier orally, then you'll be fine. So don't memorize the specific criteria for each of the indices. Know the range of the scores. Know the rule of thumb is that a low score is good health and a high score is bad. And anything that is unique about that index, you'll be fine. In terms of my test, and honestly, I think for boards as well. It's just way too much material to know. So let's start off by talking about oral health and gingival indices. So the first index, we're going to go over 7 indices in this particular section. The first index that we're going to talk about is the Simplified Oral Hygiene Index. This is a common one, and it is commonly, you'll see it as OHI-S. So that's how it is abbreviated. And it measures the existing plaque and calculus as oral cleanliness indications. So in the OHIS, this is the only index in this section that actually is composed of 2 different indices. And they combine the 2 different indices to make the OHIS. So we have a debris index, which actually scores plaque and material ABA together, as well as stain. And then we have a calculus index, which is abbreviated CI. So the debris index, DI, has a scale from 0 to 3. And the calculus index has a scale from 0 to 3. So the OHIS, you can have a total score of the OHIS from a range of 0 to 6. You can have 2 scores are then averaged for a total mouth score, and then you add in all the mouth scores and they're averaged for a complete sample score. So the purpose of the OHIS is to measure the coronal extent of debris and calculus, and they say that that is an indication of a community's overall oral hygiene status. And it uses 6 index teeth. So it doesn't look at the entire mouth. It only looks at 6 teeth within the mouth and scores 6 teeth. And 2 scores are given for each of those teeth. So the teeth are, and you'll see them later on here, so don't worry about writing them down right now unless you want to. You use the facial of 3, 11, 14, and 24, and then you use the linguals of 19 and 30. So you're going to score each one of those surfaces. So you're going to score the facial of 3 and give it 2 scores. And then you're going to score the facial of 11 and give it 2 scores. So this is the debris index, and you can see, again, the range is from 0 to 3. As 0 means that there's no debris, no stain, no plaque, no material lava at all. A 1 means that there is a little bit of debris, a little bit of plaque or stain, but it doesn't cover but 1/3 of the tooth surface. So it doesn't go over 1/3 of the tooth surface. So you can see that in the picture up here where the 1 is pointing to a tooth. It's just really kind of a gingival third of the tooth surface that is covered. A 2 means that there's soft debris and it covers more than 1/3 but not more than 2/3 of the tooth surface. And a 3 means that pretty much the entire tooth is covered in plaque or plaque or stain. So basically, how you score this is that you run a probe or an explorer or something like that across the surface, and you identify the plaque, and then you score it based on the amount of plaque that is present. Then you do the same thing with calculus. So the calculus is scored also a 0 to 3, and it has the same criteria. So a 0 would be no calculus present. 1 would mean that there's supragingival calculus, but it doesn't go over more than 1/3 of the tooth surface, and so on. So you would get a debris score and a calculus score, add them together for that tooth. You would do that for all 6 teeth, so then you would get a mouse score. And then let's say you did an OHIS for 10 people. So 10 people would have a mouse score. Then you would take the mouse scores of those 10 people and average them together. And then you would get an overall community score for those 10 people. And you can see the rating of the scores on the bottom right box there. And you know, if the community has a score that is, let's say, a 0.9, then you would say that that community has good overall oral hygiene, because it falls in that range from 0.1 to 1.2. So that's how you would score the community on the OHIS. Again, if you know the ranges and you know the rule of thumb that a low score means good oral health, a bad score means poor oral health, you'll be okay. So that's the OHIS, and that's how it's used in the community. The second index is the PHP, the Patient Hygiene Performance. And the patient performance is in removing debris after you give them toothbrushing instructions. So it assesses the patient's performance after you do your education for them. We actually used to do the PHP in our clinic as opposed to the plaque index that we have now, which is interesting. So what you do is you disclose the teeth, and you're going to look at those same 6 teeth that you looked at in the oral hygiene OHIS, and know that 19 and 30 are lingual surfaces and all the other surfaces are facial. So you're going to evaluate those, but you're also going to divide those 6 teeth into 5 different surfaces. So you're going to have it almost looks like a ladder in the middle of the tooth. So you're going to do the middle third and the mesial third and the distal third of the tooth in a vertical plane, and then the middle third is subdivided horizontally into an incisal, a middle, and a gingival third. So you would actually have potentially 5 areas or 5 surfaces that the plaque could show up on those 6 teeth. So you add all those areas together that have disclosing solution that shows up, and then you divide by the total amount of tooth surfaces that you examine. So you have 5 surfaces per tooth, 30 surfaces for all 6 teeth. So if you were doing a community PHP, then you would divide that appropriately. But the purpose is to assess the patient performance to see how effective you were with your patient education. Here's the scoring guide. Again, a 0, excellent health. And then if you get, up to closer to 5, 3.5 to 5, that means really poor oral health. It probably would look a lot like this patient's mouth that is pictured here, where plaque is just everywhere. The third index is the VMI, the Volpe-Manhold Index. The purpose is to measure supragingival calculus formation after prophy. And we typically use this to test whether a new product is effective in terms of calculus formation. So like if I developed a new toothpaste and I said that it had tartar control, then what I would do is that I would, to test this, I would make sure that my patient sample was clean, completely clean, and then I would bring them back in to see how much calculus formed after they were using my product on a regular basis. So you're really only looking at the 6 lower anterior teeth on the lingual side. So you're going to look at the lingual, distal, and mesial surfaces, and you're going to use a probe, and you're going to measure basically the linear extent of calculus buildup. So you're going to look at it in 0.5 millimeters increments, and the range is from 0 to 5 millimeters. So basically the tooth score, so you're going to have 6 different teeth scores, and you're going to add all those scores up on those 3 surfaces, and then the patient total score is going to be the sum of all of those scores put together. The fourth index is the plaque index. It is not the plaque index that we use in our clinic. This is the low incidence plaque index, and it has a companion index called the gingival index, the GI. And typically when you're using the plaque index and the gingival index together in community public health data gathering, you would typically use the gingival index first in case you use disclosing solution. But the purpose is to score the thickness of the plaque at the gingival margin. You're also going to have a 0 to 3 scale. A lot of these have 0 to 3 scales. And you are going to look at the mesial, buccal, lingual, and the facial of these teeth. And basically you're going to use all the teeth in the mouth, and you're going to air dry the teeth. You're typically not going to stain up a patient with the low incidence plaque index. So you're going to air dry the teeth, and you are going to use a probe to determine the plaque level on the teeth. And you're going to score each teeth, and then you're going to add them all together and average them and get a mouse score. It is a sensitive index because you are using all of your teeth there. And you're using 4 surfaces of the tooth and determining plaque retention. But it is somewhat difficult to use epidemiologically because air drying out in the community is hard, and it uses all the teeth. So it takes a lot of time to be able to do the plaque index here. But I also want to say that you do the gingival index first in case you do use the disclosing solution. For some reason or another, you use a modified plaque index because the GI, the gingival index, is going to look at color and firmness and bleeding, and then that would be really hard to tell if the color of the gingiva or the bleeding if you were disclosed already. So this is the score. Again, 0 to 3. You can see 0 is complete health, no plaque. 3 is that you just basically have plaque everywhere. You have plaque and soft matter in the pocket, on the margin, all over the tooth, just icky, icky teeth. 2 is a moderate accumulation of soft deposits within gingival pocket on the margin or the tooth surface, it's basically visible to the naked eye. It's not covering the entire tooth, but it's visible to the naked eye. You add all the scores for all the teeth, and then you divide by the number of teeth that was assessed. You can see that a calibration session is essential whenever you're utilizing the plaque index out in the field, simply because what I think is an abundance of soft matter could be what my partner thinks is a moderate accumulation. So you have to be very clear on the standards that you use with your research team. The companion to the plaque index, the low incidence plaque index, is the low incidence gingival index. And the purpose is to measure the severity of inflammation at the gingival margin. And it also scores the gingiva from a 0 to 3 on all teeth on all 4 of those surfaces. And it's the most widely used gingival index. It's an ordinal scale index, and obviously it's reversible. We're looking at color, consistency, and bleeding here. And it measures gingivitis only. So you cannot use the gingival index as a proxy for periodontal disease. So remember, whenever you're talking about validity and it measures what you're intending to measure, you can't say that the gingival index is measuring the extent of periodontal disease. That wouldn't be very valid. So how you score the gingival index is a little bit different than what most people would think. What you would do is that you actually you press the gingiva with the probe to determine how firm it is or how squishy it is. And then what you do is that you insert the probe about 1 to 2 millimeters deep, and then you run the probe along the inside of the sulcus. And then, so it's like you're doing a circumference stroke, not a walking stroke. So you're not bobbing up and down. You're just going from distal to mesial, about 1 millimeter inside the pocket. And then basically what you're looking for is bleeding. So if there's bleeding there or not. This is the scoring guide of the gingival index. Again, a 0 to 3. You can see that 0 would be a normal, healthy, pink stippled gingiva. A 1 is a mild inflammation, and they have operationalized that as a slight change in color, slight puffiness, no bleeding on probing. A 2 is a moderate inflammation. You do get some bleeding on probing there. You do get some redness and some puffiness. And then a 3 is a severe inflammation, where it's, that gingiva is angry, and if you look at it wrong across the room, it's going to start bleeding on you. Here's the rating of scores. Again, you can, for multiple teeth, you total all the scores, and then you divide by the amount of teeth. So once you do that, you'll get a score from 0 to 3, and then you can see if your community, if you have multiple mouths and multiple scores, and you average all those scores together, and then you can see if they're in good condition, fair condition, or poor condition. So what's interesting, whenever you're using the plaque index and the gingival index, you can have a GI that, let's say it's a 3, but a plaque index of a 0. What do you think is happening there? It could be something completely different that's interfering with the gingival health, like a systemic disease or a medication that's causing a lot of gingivitis, but it's not plaque induced. So you can have something like that happen, where you have a really high gingival index score, but a plaque index score that is really low for an individual patient. So two more oral health indices that we want to go over. The SBI, which is the sulcus bleeding index. It basically measures BOP, bleeding upon probing. So it's going to look at 4 points on the tooth, the facial, mesial, lingual, and the distal. And what you're going to do is you are going to probe, and then you're going to wait 30 seconds, and then you're going to score whether there is bleeding or not. And here's the criteria. It's not a 0 to 3 range. It's actually a 0 to 5 range here. So you're going to look at whether there's BOP, and then you're also going to be looking at if there's color changes, if there's swelling, and if there's some ulceration. So if there's BOP, if there's a lot of bleeding, if the gingiva is really red, a lot of swelling, maybe has some ulcerations, then you would score that as a 5. In terms of scoring, you are going to add up all the surfaces that you scored, and then you're going to divide by 4. And then you're going to get a total score that way. And then you'll get an individual score. And then once you get multiple individual scores, you can average all those individual scores together to get a community score. Don't worry about how to really score like all the addition and all that type of stuff. I'm not going to ask you to do that. I just am giving that for your information. The last oral hygiene index that we're going to go over is the gingival bleeding index, the GBI. And basically it's looking at bleeding again, but instead of probing, you're going to floss. So you're going to floss with our normal C-shaped flossing technique. You're going to move the floss up and down into that sulcus for one stroke. You're going to wait 30 minutes and see if bleeding occurs. And this is a dichotomous index. Remember, dichotomous means that we're going to record whether bleeding happens or it doesn't happen. So that's all we're really looking at. And we're basically what we're saying is that bleeding is a proxy for gingival inflammation. So we're saying when we use the gingival bleeding index that if your gingiva is inflamed, it's going to bleed. So it's not as sensitive as the SBI simply because it's not looking at the other indicators of gingival health, such as color and consistency. It's only looking at that bleeding point. So in terms of scoring, you would add up all the bleeding points, and then you would have a mouse score. And then if you had multiple mouse scores for multiple people within the community, then you could get a community score that way and average them all together. So those are our gingival health, oral hygiene indices. The next video we're going to explore periodontal indices.